You are listening to the International Radio Report. Your reactions are much appreciated. Feel free to send them to radioreport@yahoo.com. That is, radioreport@yahoo.com. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Radio Report for Sunday, March the 9th, 2025, here on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. My name's Sheldon. I'm here with Gilles. We have our usual 30 minutes of news and information for you today from the world of radio. We have a little bit of everything around the world today for you. Some international stories coming up in part 2 of today's show. We will start off with some updated information on the upcoming 38th annual NASWA SWL Festival, taking place April 25th and 26th. It is a hybrid event, and there's an in-person element to it as well as a Zoom. And we have seen the first draft of the list of events, forums, and sessions and information sessions that will be going on throughout the weekend. You can see all of that posted on the website for the event, swlfest.com. So you can check that out. It is still under development. There are some things that will probably be added and some things that require some more information. But that'll give you a pretty good idea of all the events that are taking place. 2 important things I want to mention to everyone. If you are thinking of participating, in-person participation, which is in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, is limited to 65 people. So you need to reserve as soon as possible, so not to miss the cutoff. And 2 dates that are very important. One is if you are planning on registering for the event on Zoom, there is a special price of $15, but you must register before April the 1st. So if you want to save on the registration fee, get that done before April the 1st. And if you're planning on participating, you must register by April the 24th. If you're not registered by that date, there will be no registrations accepted once the event has started on the 25th of April. So those 2 very important dates to remember. April the 1st, if you want to benefit from the $15 registration fee, and April 24th is the absolute deadline for registering for participating in the SWL Festival. So check it all out, swlfest.com. And if you have any questions, you can contact them, swlfest@NASWA, that's NASWA.net.
And in our first news item, we have a new campaign that calls for a Canadian to, FU **, insert your own curse word there, or fund the CBC in upcoming election. This is by Connie Thiessen of Broadcast Dialogue. Friends of Canadian Media has launched a nationwide campaign calling on Canadians to choose the party that will fund CBC Radio-Canada in the upcoming federal election. In a play on the word fund, the English, FU **, the CBC campaign is kicking off with projections onto buildings and wall postings in Vancouver, Winnipeg, and the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. Ad display trucks will also drive through Vancouver. This will also go through in Ottawa, while digital ads, TV, and radio commercial will also appear in both languages starting next week across the country. So why is there a little play in the words here? Well, it's because for months we've had to endure conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's cynical calls to defund our national public broadcaster. Friends Executive Director Marla Boltman said in a release, "We want to support funding for CBC Radio-Canada, so we've created a bold campaign that pokes fun at political ads and encourages voters to choose a party that will defend CBC Radio-Canada, not defund it." Boltman said with the campaign being launched in the midst of a trade war with the U.S., Canadians are galvanized to stand up for their sovereignty and democracy. Given the recent unprovoked economic talks by Trump and his digs about the 51st state, Canadians are rallying around the maple leaf to protect our sovereignty and our democracy, added Boltman. That makes CBC Radio-Canada's ability to gather us as a national community more important than ever. The media advocacy group's campaign comes on the heels of a set of proposed amendments to the Broadcast Act from Canadian Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge that would ensure a more stable and predictable source of funding for the public broadcaster by establishing a statutory appropriation based on an annual per capita formula that would not require an annual vote by Parliament as part of the budget process. The minister also intends to bring CBC Radio-Canada federal funding more in line with its G7 counterparts. Right now, the public broadcaster places sixth among G7 countries, allocating $33.66 per capita, well below the $62.20 average. So it's shocking, but interesting way of advertising the CBC Radio-Canada funding and kind of telling us that, depending on what word you want to use, we'll often go with what political party will be in power.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty bold move. I think the numbers speak for themselves. This has always been something that other broadcasters around the world have realized about Canada, that we're able to do what we do in the way of domestic, and when we were doing the international broadcasting, we were able to do it at a much cheaper rate than pretty much any other country. And foreign broadcasters were always puzzled by how we were able to do that. So, it's costing us about half the cost of what it would cost the average in all of the other countries combined in the G7. So, I think it's important that and encouraging to see that people have taken up this cause. Whether it's going to have any effect or not remains to be seen. It'll all come down to what the election results are and how true to their words the politicians are. And we know that is not a given all the time. They can say a lot of things when they're campaigning, and then when it comes time to put their money where their mouth is, it doesn't necessarily happen. Yep. So we'll keep an eye out on it, and we hope that that things will settle down a little bit, and realize that we're getting pretty good bang for the buck in Canadian broadcasting. We move to the States, and there's a little bit of friction going on with something involving the AM radio bill. Broadcasters storm Capitol Hill, pushing for passage of the AM radio bill. This is via Inside Radio. More than 550 broadcasters from around the country are descending on Washington this week for the NAB, or the National Association of Broadcasters, annual State Leadership Conference. The two-day event, which brings industry executives to the Capitol to lobby on broadcast issues, continues. The focus is on meeting with lawmakers to advocate for legislation requiring AM radios in cars, while also urging them to oppose a proposed performance royalty on radio airplay. The event kicked off on Tuesday with NAB President Curtis Legaite's annual State of the Industry speech. His comments focused on broadcasters' essential role in their communities and the impact of their advocacy efforts on Capitol Hill. Legaite also highlighted key policy priorities that broadcast advocates will discuss with lawmakers, including what the NAB argues is an urgent need to modernize broadcast ownership rules, as well as efforts to keep AM radios accessible in vehicles. Broadcasters also heard from several members of Congress, including Senator Ted Cruz and Maria Cantwell, and Representatives Brett Guthrie and Jamie Raskin. Cruz spoke about the importance of the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. He is the bill's lead sponsor, and as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, Cruz drove the bill to quick passage last month, sending it to the full Senate for approval. If passed, it requires the Secretary of Transportation to issue a rule requiring access to AM broadcast stations in motor vehicles. If they don't, car makers could be fined, and car makers would be prohibited from charging extra for AM. Cantwell, the ranking Democrat on the committee, spoke about the important work local stations do in their communities, calling for the modernization of outdated broadcast ownership rules and other measures to support broadcasters' investment in local journalism. Cantwell in the past proposed legislation that, had it passed, would have provided the media tax credits for hiring local news journalists. Guthrie, who is chair of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, shared how broadcasters play a critical role in times of emergency and the need for a level playing field for broadcasters to compete and thrive. And Raskin spoke about how a strong and independent local broadcast media is essential to democracy. FCC Commissioner Nathan Symington also participated in a question and answer session. He reportedly told the crowd to expect more coordinated action between the White House and the FCC. During the question and answer period with NAB Chief Legal Officer Rick Kaplan, they also discussed what both see as the need to address decades-old media ownership rules. So some good talks going on and some encouraging actions to push for passage of this AM radio bill. We've been talking about it for months now, and it's kind of like right on the edge now where it looks like it may go through, but with everything changing in the U.S. right now, we can't be sure. So I think this is why the broadcasters, seeing as there were so many of them all together right there in Washington, they decided to put a little push on it and see if they can hammer it through.
Yeah, the more pressure you put on politicians, the better chances you get, especially to counterbalance all the money that the auto manufacturers are putting in to try to prevent AM radios going into cars. So let's hope that this goes through. Fines for the automakers that don't do it, fine with me.
I can live with that.
So in our next news, we have SiriusXM that launches Gaga Radio and Mary J. Blige Radio by Lance Venta of Radio Insight. So SiriusXM has announced the launch of Gaga Radio on Channel 15 through March 17th and SiriusXM app until April 2nd. The channel features music handpicked by Lady Gaga and behind-the-scenes stories from the making of her new album, Mayhem. SiriusXM says little monsters across North America can tune in to hear new tracks from the album along with the songs across genres and decades that influenced and inspired the pop icon, including classics from David Bowie, Whitney Houston, Bruce Springsteen, Ella Fitzgerald, Prince, Madonna, Elton John, Queen, Tony Bennett, and more. SiriusXM President Chief Content Officer Scott Greenstein said Lady Gaga is a true innovator and trailblazer whose versatility and influence has shaped pop music as we know it today and the music industry as a whole. We are thrilled to give Gaga's dedicated fan base a closer look into the making of her long-awaited seventh album, Mayhem, as well as the music and experiences that have defined her as an artist. Mary J. Blige Radio debuted on the SiriusXM app and will be running until April 2nd, while also on Channel 79 from March 18th to March 24th. Mary J. Blige Radio will feature all of her empowering classics and current hits, album cuts, and live performances from her celebrated career of over 30 years. You'll also hear legendary artists who've paved the way and influenced Mary J. Blige, like Anita Baker, Beyonce, Chaka Khan, Lauryn Hill, Rihanna, Usher, and Whitney Houston, along with the next generation of artists who look to her for current inspiration, including Coco Jones, Ella May, Jasmine Sullivan, Lucky Day, Mooney Long, and Summer Walker, Victoria Monet, and more. So this is interesting. Anybody that's fan of either Lady Gaga and Mary J. Blige, I think it's interesting. You know, I find these super interesting when you go into the depth of the artist itself, what changed, what made the artist, the way they are and what they listen to also is kind of intriguing. What do you listen to? What exactly influenced you? It's always fun to listen to that.
Yeah, if you have SiriusXM, in addition to these two channels, on Tuesday morning next week, Lady Gaga will be appearing on the Howard Stern radio show on SiriusXM channel 100, and she's been there before. They bring a piano in. She does live performances in studio, and the last time she was there, really interesting interview with Howard Stern. So if you're a fan, you may want to check that out. That'll be Tuesday morning, starting at 7 o'clock. The show runs between 7 and 10. So she will probably be there, I'd say probably for a good hour or maybe even more. So it should be some interesting listening.
So what's happening with our sun? Well, our sun this week was on average rather quiet, but there were a few flares that were just enough to bring the geomagnetic storm levels to G1 class at a couple of times. So conditions were up and down, but for the most part, they weren't too bad. And there is quite a lot of things to listen to. We are getting very close to the equinox, and that shows on the bands. I had my first glimpse of Radio New Zealand 17675 at midnight local. That's 05 UTC this week. So it shows you that the days are starting to change and get longer here in the Northern Hemisphere. And the week ahead, there's a couple of sunspots, 4012 and 4016, that have what it takes to create M-class solar flares. So it's not impossible that we have kind of another up and down week of conditions, and especially at this time of year in March in general, the geomagnetic storms are easy to trigger, so anything can happen during the week. But when it's quiet, it is amazing. The sunspot number 139, the solar flux 150, and you know what? To witness all of this and to listen to all of these stations, you got to turn on a radio and listen.
This is Peter Laws in Norman, Oklahoma. AM, FM, shortwave, amateur radio, and more. You'll hear all the latest news from the world of radio each week with Sheldon and Jill on the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
We should take just a moment to remind everyone that we have hit the daylight time change, and our show is still at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, but that doesn't change at least UTC time does not change around the world. It is a standard, but it does mean that our show is now at 14:30 UTC instead of 15:30 UTC. So we hope you have made your adjustment to that. But if you're going by our local time, then 10:30 is 10:30. But remember that the UTC time is now a 4-hour difference between the Eastern time zone and UTC time. A country we haven't talked about too much on the program in the past is Saudi Arabia. And we have a story from Radio Info Asia about the radio landscape in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's national broadcaster changed from being the Saudi Broadcasting Corporation to the Saudi Broadcasting Authority in 2018 as part of a wider revolution of media under a new converged regulatory regime. The Saudi Broadcasting Authority had a strong presence at the recent Saudi Media Forum. It now operates the country's public TV stations, a production commissioning business, a broadcasting service business, plus 2 local radio stations and 5 national stations known as Saudi Radio. So the stations are Riyadh Radio, Jeddah Radio, Saudi Radio, international programs, Holy Quran Radio, Neda al-Islam Radio, and military radio. Public radio broadcasting in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia began in 1948. In 1964, the Riyadh Broadcasting Station began its transmission, and in 1979, the stations were unified into the General Service known as SBC. In addition to the General Service, there are now a number of other radio stations, including the second program service, which broadcasts folkloric, drama, recreational, literary, and scientific programs. Other radio channels include the Call of Islam Broadcasting Service, the Holy Quran Broadcasting Channel, and the Multi-Language Foreign Service. Public television broadcasting in Saudi Arabia commenced in 1965. There are currently 10 television channels. Government stations are regulated and adhere to the basic law of broadcasting, which emphasizes the use of Arabic as the primary language and prohibits content deemed offensive or divisive. There are 9 private commercial radio stations in Saudi Arabia, according to broadcaster Masood, who spoke to Radio Info at the Saudi Media Forum. We have maybe 8 or 9 private stations. There are some sports stations, some news stations, some music, and we have public stations as well. They are different, appearing on different FM frequencies. Some commercial stations from nearby states can also be heard in Saudi Arabia. So a nice variety of programming and stations that people can listen to, both radio and television, and content-wise as well in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
There's a lot of broadcasters also, especially those clandestine broadcasters that are using the shortwave transmitters situated in Saudi Arabia for some of their broadcasts also. But the main broadcasts of Saudi Arabia on shortwave is pretty much... I haven't heard them in kind of a little while, so you might want to use either some QESDRs online somewhere close or listen to their streamings. They have some streaming online. So in our next news, we have Taliban allows Afghanistan's only women-run station to resume broadcasts. So we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where it was shut down. This is via Radio Info Asia. Radio Begum, Afghanistan's only women-run radio station, will resume broadcasts after the Taliban lifted their suspension over alleged cooperation with an overseas TV channel. Radio Begum was launched on International Women's Day in March 2021, 5 months before the Taliban seized power. The station's content is produced entirely by Afghan women and aims to educate girls and support Afghan women. Its sister satellite channel, Begum TV, operates from France and broadcasts programs that cover the Afghan school curriculum from 7th to 12th grade. The station was rated by the General Directorate of Intelligence, the GDI, and the Ministry of Information and Culture on February 4th. Leading to its closure and the arrest of 2 employees. In a statement, the Taliban Information and Culture Ministry said Radio Begum had repeatedly requested to restart operations and that the suspension was lifted after the station made commitments to the authorities. The station pledged to conduct broadcasts in accordance with the principles of journalism and the regulations of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and to avoid any violations in the future. Okay, it added the ministry did not elaborate what those principles and regulations were. Radio Begum confirmed the ministry had granted permission to resume broadcasting. It did not give further details. The Information Ministry did not initially identify the TV channels it alleged Radio Begum had been working with, but the Saturday statement mentioned collaboration with foreign sanctioned media outlets. The Afghanistan Journalist Support Organization announced that while the station has resumed broadcast, its detained employees are still in custody. And according to the Journalist Support Organization, discontinued detention highlights the ongoing suppression of media and the severe restriction placed on the journalists in Afghanistan. In the 2024 Press Freedom Index from Reporters Without Borders, Afghanistan ranks 178 out of 180 countries. The year before, it ranked 152. So, some good news that they've allowed the station to come back. I think it is probably vital to get some information to the women out there. And hopefully the restrictions that they have are not too intense, and they'll be able to at least have some informative programming to go out to women.
Yeah, I think it's the first time we've had a story of a station going back on the air in Afghanistan. We've only had stories of stations being pulled off the air. So that's one step in the right direction for sure. Finally, today in our news stories, we have some late breaking news, and we want to thank Alokesh Gupta and Lee Mitchell in South Carolina, who relayed Gupta's story. The AWR Adventist World Radio Wavescan program will be broadcast by Reach Beyond Australia for the A25 season, which is the 30th of March, 2025 onward. They're going to have two transmissions, 1400 to 1430 UTC on 11870 kilohertz on Sundays, and 2230 to 2300 UTC on 17650 kilohertz, and that will be on Mondays. And Gilles, you heard Adventist World Radio mentioning this on their program?
Yep, last week's program that I was listening through their podcast had mentioned that they were going to be on Reach Beyond Australia station, so this is good news. And adding to a complete schedule, because they have several relays of other stations, so they're on WRMI and they're on WWCR. So they have several broadcasts that are through the week. A great program if you've not listened to, especially for their historical content of old radio stations and old broadcasting services from different countries around the world. Very, very nice and well-made DX show, as we call them. And it's fun. It's great to listen to. So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
Starting off with the British Amateur Radio Teledata Group, which is organizing their HFRTTY contest, 0200 Zulu March 15th to 0159 Zulu March 17th. The bands are 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters, and the mode is radio teletype only.
There's the Russian DX contest, 1200 Zulu March 15th to 1200 Zulu March 16th. Organized by the Union of Radio Amateurs of Russia. The bands 160 through 10 meters, no work bands, and no contest QSOs on the work bands, as they say, and CW and phone.
The Sterling Park Amateur Radio Club is organizing the Virginia QSO Party. It's broken into two sections, 1400 Zulu March 15th to 0400 Zulu March 16th, and then resumes at 1200 UTC or Zulu to 2400 Zulu on March the 16th. The bands are 160 through 10 meters, no work bands, and it's an all-mode event.
And we are out of time.
We thank you for tuning into our show. You can reach us with any questions or comments by email, radioreport@yahoo.com. Our show is live streamed and archived at ckut.ca. Our Facebook group is the International Radio Report. We have a lot of members there, pushing our way towards 1,000. If you have not joined yet, please consider doing so. And if you want to catch our show anytime you like, go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@IRR. You can subscribe and listen to the current show and past shows as well on that YouTube channel. So thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you again next Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 14:30 UTC, here on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
This is Radio Berlin International, the voice of the German Democratic Republic, broadcasting for listeners in Europe.